Hello and welcome to the Music GCSE YouTube channel. This video is part of a series on rhythms of the world, and in this video we're going to take a look at Indian classical music. So what will you learn from this video? You'll learn the typical musical features of Indian classical music, the instruments used and the layers they perform, the structure of Indian classical music, and a suitable artist. But before we start looking at any of that, let's take a look at where Indian classical music comes from. There is more than one type of music to come out of India. However, the Music in Your exam will focus on Indian classical music from the north of India. Now, in your exam, if you're asked where this music is from, India is a perfectly acceptable answer. You do not need to say North India. So let's take a look at some of the typical musical features of Indian classical music. Firstly, just like other styles of music from rhythms of the world, it is an oral tradition, meaning it is learnt by ear and passed down from generation to generation. Indian classical music will typically have three layers called the raga, the drone and the tala. We will talk about those in more detail later in the video. Indian classical music will usually be performed in concert halls where the performers will be sat on the floor. Typically there'll be no set time signature and large parts of the performance can be free time, meaning it can speed up and slow down as the performers wish. And Indian classical music will use lots of improvisation, which we will talk about a little bit later. Now let's take a look at some of the instruments commonly used in Indian classical music. Firstly, we will look at the sitar, which is a large string instrument. The sitar can actually have up to 21 strings and is commonly used to perform the raga, which we will talk about a little bit later on in the video. Now you may get asked to describe what the sitar is playing, so some of these playing techniques might be useful for your exam. First of all, the sitar will most likely be playing multiple strings at the same time. Some of them as open strings, some of them as fretted notes. And some of the other playing techniques will be things very similar to a guitar, such as string bends, slides or glissandos, hammer-ons, pull-offs, and the player of the sitar will use a lot of improvisation. I've included a link in the YouTube description down below to another YouTube video where you can see and hear a sitar being performed. Another common instrument used in Indian classical music is the tanpura, which is another string instrument, but this time it only has 4 strings. And the tanpura plays the drone, which again we'll talk about a little bit later in the video. So just like with the sitar, you may get asked to describe what the tanpura plays. So it will play a small range of notes, sometimes just 2 or 3 notes, and the notes are really long held, which is why this part is called the drone. Again, I've included a link in the description to this video, which will take you to another YouTube video where you can see and hear a tanpura being performed. And finally, we'll talk about the tabla. The tabla is a percussion instrument which consists of 2 drums. We have a larger drum and a smaller drum. And the tabla is responsible for playing the tala, which again we will talk about a little bit later on in the video. Again, if you're asked to describe what the tala plays, despite the fact that it's just 2 drums, performers can actually make a wide range of sounds using different parts of their hand and hitting the drums in different places. And just like with all the other instruments in Indian classical music, tabla players learn their parts by ear. And tabla players will use vocal sounds to help describe and teach the different parts they are playing. I will include a link in the description to this YouTube video where you can see and hear a tabla being performed. It is not unusual for Indian classical music to have vocals which will usually be performed in either Hindu, Urdu or Punjabi. And just like other styles of music in rhythms of the world that uses vocals, the vocals will be very decorative, using lots of melisma. That's where we can stretch a word or a syllable of a word out over multiple notes. And again, just like other styles of music in rhythms of the world, the vocals will use microtonal intervals. An interval is the relationship between 2 notes, and a microtonal interval is the smallest movement between one note to another. It's so small it can't actually be replicated on instruments like a piano. And finally, the vocals will be very expressive, using things like changes in dynamics to help add to the expression in how the vocals are delivered. So let's recap on the role of these instruments. What layer does the sitar play? That's right, it plays the raga. What layer does the tanpura play? Absolutely right, it plays the drone. And what layer does the tabla play? That's right, the tabla plays the tala. So we've learnt about the instruments in Indian classical music, and we've used the words raga, drone and tala, but now let's learn what those are and take a look at the layers used within a piece of Indian classical music, starting with the raga. So the raga is the main melodic layer of a piece of Indian classical music. And a raga is a set of notes, a bit like a scale, and there are thousands of different ragas. The performer will improvise using the notes of the raga. Now, the raga is usually performed on the sitar, however, it can sometimes be performed on a wind instrument. If that happens in your exam and you can hear a wind instrument playing the raga, like the music in the background of this video, then a wind instrument for you to remember is the bansuri, which is a simple wooden flute which is used within Indian classical music. The next layer we're going to talk about is the drone, which adds the accompaniment to a piece of Indian classical music. The drone consists of long held notes, and like I just said, it forms the accompaniment and it helps pad out the texture. And as we said earlier in the video, this is performed on the tanpura. And the final layer we're going to talk about is the tala, which is the rhythmic layer, or in other words, the drum beat. This is performed on the tabla, and just like with the raga, there are thousands of different talas which are all taught by ear, and performers use vocal sounds and words to learn the rhythms. Each sound and word represents striking the drum in a certain way, and the first beat of any tala is called the sam. Now we're going to take a look at the structure used within a piece of Indian classical music. And a typical piece of Indian classical music will be separated into 3 sections. The first section is called the alap. Now, in the alap, we only have the raga and the drone. The tabla does not play, meaning there's no set pulse and it's completely free time, and this section of the performance is heavily improvised. After the alap, we have the gat, which is where we hear the tala for the first time. So we know we've entered this bit because we hear the tabla start playing. It has more of a sense of pulse and more of a fixed tempo. There's still lots of improvisation, but there could be some fixed and learned phrases within this section of the performance. Then after the gat, we have the jahala, which is a fast and exciting final section of the performance. The whole performance builds in intensity and excitement. The raga and the tala both become more complex and more virtuosic, and the whole thing builds to a climactic end. And the final thing we're going to look at in this video is a suitable artist for Indian classical music. If you are asked to identify a suitable artist for a piece of Indian classical music, then Ravi Shankar will always get you a mark for that type of question. Remember, if you are asked to identify a suitable artist for any style of music in your exam, you do not need to identify the artist actually playing the extract, just a suitable artist for that genre and that style. So there we go. Hopefully you have now developed a basic understanding of Indian classical music. Why not pause the video here and try and test yourself? Can you answer the questions on screen now? If you haven't already, click the logo to subscribe to the channel and click over here to have a look at other videos in this playlist or other videos on the channel. And you can use the self-quiz pages at the music revision website at www.musicgcse.co.uk.